This episode of Twin Cities Trekkies is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor before, let me explain. First of all, it's free. There are creation tools that help you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. You can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership required. They'll also help you to distribute your podcast so it can be heard on many different platforms such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's all you need in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome to episode 4 of Twin Cities Trekkies. I am Wes.
And I'm Kenzie.
And today we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of Star Trek fandom. And, fandom culture has been around since everything's been around, and that kind of thing.
Anytime you can be interested in anything, there's going to be a fandom around it.
Exactly, definitely. Like, I'm a fan of podcasts. You can be a fan of a certain kind of podcast, like and that kind of thing. For example, I'm a big fan of a few Star Trek podcasts. I can pick up a couple of them right off the top of my head. They're both from the Roddenberry Podcast Network, Daily Star Trek News, Mission Log. I'm a big fan of those, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it could be around anything. Sports. I'm really into fashion and makeup, so in those realms, like there are pros and cons of being a part of that world, just as it is with any other like more stereotypical fandom that people think of. Like when people think of fandom culture, I feel like they often think of more like media related things like Star Wars, Star Trek, like shows like that, or movies, or things that people are really into that have to do with media, where people are dressing up, people are role playing, cosplaying, like think like Lord of the Rings or Dungeons and Dragons, and the culture surrounding those. But really anything that you can nerd out about, which can literally be anything, has its own fandom.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of both Star Trek and Star Wars, and that's something we could talk about another time. But why I like both? You kind of like both, don't you?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think it could be one or the other. It's always both.
Yeah, exactly. So, let you guys know how to get in touch with us. It's tctrekkiespodcast@gmail.com is our email address. So if you have any feedback, any episode suggestions, stuff like that, please give us an email. We would love to read your email and stuff like that, and take your feedback or episode suggestion into consideration. Because like I've said before, I have a list, but it only goes so far. Because I adapt things from other podcasts, other things as well, but what they do, and then it's like, okay, I'll do that for mine, and that kind of thing. It's kind of like a shared kind of community.
Yeah.
So that's what I was thinking of, community. But definitely,
look at us, like with our actual term, like Trekkies. That is the defining, or Trekkers, like the defining words of the Star Trek fandom. Like those who love Star Trek are Trekkies.
Yeah, definitely. So, and then, but you can also give us feedback by, you can also subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's Twin Cities Trekkies, pretty easy to find. You can also, like our Facebook page, facebook.com/TCTrekkiesPod. You can also follow. We're on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor.fm. Because of that, they distribute our podcasts and stuff like that. So it's pretty much on any platform you can think of. And also, you can all once eventually it will get on Apple Podcasts, everyone, because I know most people that I know listen through Apple. So eventually we'll be on Apple. Just be patient with us.
Yeah.
And be patient with us and the people who host our feed. Just be patient with us. We'll get it there. I'll let you guys know we'll let
It's
you guys know.
all about exploring and figuring out what works best. And if you have feedback about anything, even from the content to how long we talk, what we talk about, have ideas for that, the format of it, those are things we love to hear because you're the ones listening to this. We want you to enjoy listening to us. So
Yeah,
let us know.
exactly. Yep, definitely. We want you to definitely want us. Yeah, definitely. We want to hear from you. Is there any way we make this like any question, any feedback, like you want to make it how to make it better, that kind of thing? We want this podcast to be great. So definitely give us a shout out, say like, hey, we enjoyed Twin Cities Trekkies. Here's what we want you guys to do. So um, and we only have like what 30 fans so on Facebook. So but we want to be a lot bigger, obviously. So yeah, definitely give us a shout out. We want to hear from you. So definitely. And please keep in mind that any feedback you may give us may be used in a future episode of Twin Cities Trekkies. All right. So let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of Star Trek fandom. This is going to be a highly sensitive topic for some, and
Yeah.
give you guys listeners a fair warning.
I mean, it's all on opinion. Like I've met a lot of people just being a gal in science, just how great, but also how dismissive people can be about fandoms and about enjoying something. Like, I mean, the good is that I've met so many people throughout my life because of Star Trek. Like, it's a shared thing that people love to talk about. I have friends across the states, across countries who love Star Trek and something that we can talk about, enjoy. I mean, things that bring people together through things like fashion, music, actors, and storylines, things that people appreciate about stories are captured with Star Trek, And I feel like that's a really important thing about why people become fans of these series because they love what it brings for them, whether it's because they love the characters, because they love the storylines, they love the fashion, whatever it might be. It offers this intersectionality of things that people are passionate about. And I mean, that's what brings people together. That's why we can have conventions and have people dressing up, people who dedicate time to making art for these shows and making outfits, making friendships, making groups, zines, magazines, just tons of things, podcasts. It's inspirational, and I mean that's what kind of defines a great fandom when it can outlast being on air since the 60s easily. Just like it's not really died down, and I feel like it'll just keep getting bigger.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping too. Granted, when the franchise goes into like a nascent period, which we had from the six from the from I'm gonna say from the one we all went, like you and I went through, was from the Enterprise in '05 to the start of Star Trek Discovery in 2017.
Yeah.
In terms of the TV side of the franchise, the franchise can lose some fans. It's like, okay, there's nothing else on for Star Trek. I'm gonna leave it, but for a while. And it's like, but I have to give credit to a couple people there for pretty much keeping the franchise alive. Pretty much, definitely George Lucas for Star Wars. Because we never would have gotten the first Star Trek movie had it not been for him.
Yeah.
And then J.J. Abrams regarding the first Star Trek movie that he did.
Yeah, and kind of broadening how people view Star Trek fans. I feel like there was a really big cultural shift around being fans of Star Trek after kind of modern movieifying the Star Trek series. Like, I always had this weird perception in my mind that like there are different subsects of what people consider like a cool fandom versus uncool fandom. And at least growing up, being in the 90s, early 2000s, it was cool to be a Star Wars nerd, but not as cool to be a Star Trek nerd. And then they were somehow binaries of each other. You were one or the other. And it's just such an interesting thing because I grew up with both. I love Star Wars and I love Star Trek. They offer me two very different things. And both of them have amazing storylines, amazing characters. I love the exploration of the technology and like the science fiction aspects of them, like with technology. But I just thought it was interesting that a lot of my friends teased me for, being a Star Trek fan versus like Star Wars. They're like, oh, well, everybody loves Star Wars. But it's like, what a weird thing, right? I'm like, what does that mean? And why is that something to, judge someone for what fandom they really enjoy? But then after the movies, like I noticed a lot more people were casually into Star Trek. And when they opened it up on Netflix and then the series were available and more of my friends were able to just watch, they realized it wasn't that outlandish or weird to enjoy those series so much.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how like I said, I credit both those gentlemen, definitely, because they're pretty much the ones who kept Star Trek alive, other than Roddenberry. But I mean, obviously we wouldn't be talking about Star Trek had it not been for him. But definitely with Lucas and Abrams, if it wasn't for them, Star Trek could have been like, just this obscure little thing, could have just been just the 60s TV show and that was it. So things of the 60s that, just were like one-offs that, that try to be relevant in the 21st century didn't really work. I'm thinking about like old series that I mean, I'm an old school fan of like old TV shows. I mean, some shows that, are dated and are dated for a reason is because, they can't really be adapted for the modern era.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking of shows like Bewitched or like shows of the 60s, like Bewitched,
Yeah.
Get Smart, those show and Bonanza, those westerns, stuff like that, they're kind of dated now and they are dated for a reason. But, it's just because they can't be adapted. So if it wasn't for George Lucas and J.J. Abrams, especially Lucas, especially for George Lucas and making Star Wars, the very first Star Wars movie, Star Trek could have been this like, very obscure thing.
And already in those time periods, it was already a big deal to be in certain fandoms. Like a lot of like superhero fandom was a huge thing all throughout the 20th century. Like people really loved superheroes. And I think what was hard for things like Star Trek to take off is it's a story of humanity, like normal old people. What happens to people, just our community, our people in the future? And where does that go? What does that story look like? And I think for some people, the fantastic idea of the future wasn't as dazzling as someone with superpowers,
Mm-hmm.
And something like Star Trek, despite the natural adversary like that Star Wars posed and kind of helped fuel keeping it alive because that binary kind of helped keep both of them up and keep it relevant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the first things that really drove Star Trek into a popular world were conventions that were just run by people who were really passionate about the show, like setting up the first Star Trek convention and they were overwhelmed because they didn't think it would be as popular as they thought. And then they were overwhelmed by the amount of people that registered and the amount of people that showed up with artwork and things that were just fan created items that just helped flourish the culture that's around Star Trek.
Yeah, definitely. Like the very first Star Trek convention in 1972. Yeah, definitely. Like they were expecting like what 800 people and like 4,000 people showed up.
Yeah.
So it's like it's like it was overwhelming for all of them, and even for the actors going like wow, we did not know that our show was this popular.
And then, just the amount of people who dedicated time to making things. Like the whole like concept of actually going to a convention to dress up,
Yep.
was sort of like, it grew from that point on. Like
Yeah.
being like people would actually show up in costume, and it's like, wow, people actually like dress up like these characters. They make art about these characters. That's such a big deal.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was such a big deal in the 70s, definitely. And it actually, like I said, that's what also fueled the desire for more Star Trek. We in the 70s it was, we had the animated show, but that was on
Mm-hmm.
Saturday mornings. I mean, it's more adult oriented Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah.
It
But I
is.
mean, my dad grew up watching it, and he absolutely loved it. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
that was a big deal for him. Just like he loved Star Trek as a kid, and it's just such an exciting thing for him. And he had so many friends who weirdly pictured it as like an old show by the time he was growing up in the '70s and then into the '80s, like where it was like that's like old people watch that show, and he's surprised by that because what an interesting take that that generation that he grew up in just kind of dismissed it as like, oh, that's old news. But then Next Generation came out, and it's like, no, it's a big deal. Like, look, it's alive and well. Like, this isn't some old show, quote unquote. This
No.
is this is an amazing series, and I mean, my dad found like-minded people like him, like making his own little fan club that him and a few of his friends had called
Hmm.
Trekkidants, and they would meet up and they get plan going to conventions together, dressing up, utilizing your skills to make costumes, talk about like different episodes they like and making artwork and just media around what they loved about Star Trek.
Yeah, definitely, and I don't I never asked my parents how they like when they were growing up watching Star Trek. I mean, I mean like I said before in the episode 1, I mean, my mom watched the original series when it was first on, and because she was alive old enough to like watch the show and stuff like that. Because some people like grew up after when I mean, were born after like you and I, but but definitely she thought it was pretty cool, and she's been a fan for that long and stuff like that. Yeah, but then it wasn't the fandom has just been it's been up and down, kind of that kind of thing. Like I said, with the nascent period between between Enterprise and Discovery, it could have lost a few luster. But I have this belief that if it wasn't for for those first two J.J. Abrams films that are actually the two biggest money makers for the film side of the franchise, we never would have gotten Discovery
Yeah.
because I mean, In the Darkness is the highest grossing film of the franchise. So it made over like 400 and some odd $1 million, which is a lot of money, but it's the highest grossing film of the franchise. Granted, it doesn't make Star Wars or Marvel money, but that's one thing that's a little bit disconcerting. I mean, I know that Paramount, whenever they want to make a Star Trek movie, I mean, they wanted Beyond to be that. They wanted Beyond to make Marvel money, but it didn't. But I mean, Beyond's one of my favorite Star Trek movies. But
Yeah.
yeah, because I think it's the best one of the Kelvin timeline, the J.J. Abrams universe films.
Yeah.
I think that's my favorite one. But definitely, yeah, without those two men, I just can't stress it enough. Without George Lucas and on J.J. Abrams, we probably wouldn't have Star Trek probably would have been remade in the 90s as a movie because there was a bunch of 60s series movies, like Brady Bunch, for example. Brady Bunch did a movie in the 90s, um, did somewhat successful. My Favorite Martian from Disney did that. It was a 60s
Yeah.
show, and kudos to Ray Walston, who was the Martian in that show, but then also was in Star Trek as groundskeeper Boothby, a couple episodes. But yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think Star Trek would have been remade in the 90s. It probably would have been like a high budgeted action movie. Like,
Yeah.
I remember this one comment from a podcast that I listened to once. Judith and Garfield, Reed Stevens were on that show. The ones who created like those nonfiction Star Trek books, like the one about Star Trek Phase Two, which was going to be the second
Yeah.
Star Trek show. I mean, I want to get my hands on that book because I'm curious to know, like, learn more about Phase Two. I mean, that would have been an interesting show, but that's beside the fact. But they said that it would have been made in the 90s. It could have had Arnold Schwarzenegger as Captain Kirk, uh, which could have been interesting. Um, make made the remade of the 90s. It could have been remade in the 90s as a movie with William Shatner as Captain Kirk, and who knows as Mr. Spock, and uh, Gary Sinise as Mr. Spock. Let's just say that, just for
Yeah.
sake of argument. Yeah. So I think it would have been interesting to see that. I mean, if Star Trek was that obscure thing, but it didn't, obviously, because we have now what, like 10 series now and 13 films. Hopefully a
Yeah.
14th coming in the next few years. Hopefully a
And like
14th.
that vastness is very daunting for a lot of people, especially people who are looking to sort of join the fandom, like they enjoy Star Trek. Like I've had a lot of friends who are hesitant to say they're fans of Star Trek, which I always thought that was a really weird thing. Like being like, oh, I really like this, but like, please, like, don't hate me for saying I've only seen this series or something. Which brings up a really weird phenomenon. I see it happens a lot with like series, like things like this,
Mm-hmm.
like Star Trek. They're so vast, so big. There's this fear of being like gatekeeped, like that you are
Yeah.
not allowed to be a part of the club if you don't know enough about Star Trek. And
Yeah.
that's something that I, as a woman, have faced people challenging me with that, where they go, oh yeah, you like Star Trek, are you sure about that, are you really a fan? And I'm like, what does that mean? What does that actually mean to be a real fan? And this is a conversation that has been reopened because of Discovery. A lot of people will argue that Discovery isn't real Star Trek, or people will argue that it's not part of canon of Star Trek. But who's to say, you know? And it becomes this weird thing of like, if that's what you like and that's all that you've seen, you're not a fan of Star Trek. You're not allowed in the club. And I'm like, who's giving me admission? Who's denying me admission? It's not how this works. But some people like to treat fandoms like that, where they're like, you either are allowed in or you're not. And I'm like, I don't like that. Which
Yeah.
changes over time, but it's gotten better over the years. But it would be like unforeseen to meet. Like there's like a really weird stereotype of like, oh, you're a girl and you like Star Trek. That's weird. Like there's if that's like a strange thing, you know? And
Yeah.
that's really weird to me that that's something that still kind of permeates people's beliefs. And maybe it's because it's in a rural area and like where I grew up, and
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of an older way of thinking that's just kind of propagated throughout generations. But I feel like it's very normal to meet people now who like Star Trek, and no one's gonna bat an eye at who you are when you say you like Star Trek. But maybe 20 years ago, me go like a lady saying they like Star Trek might be a little like, or like some guy who's like a football player saying they like Star Trek, be like, what? No way. Like,
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of like the bad and the ugly of the fandom. It kind of granted, I will freely admit, I have done that. I mean, I will freely admit as a person, as like a fan of Star Trek for the last 31 years of my life, um, I have I have done that mentality.
yeah. And
And
it happens.
it
When you're really passionate about something and you really like something, it can be hard to see someone who maybe hasn't had as much experience or passion as you have around that be like, me too, I'm on the same page. And it's like, no, you're not, because I've dedicated way more time and livelihood to loving this than you have, which it shouldn't be a competition, but it happens. I feel like it's a natural defense mechanism of like, I know you say you like Star Trek, but I don't think you understand what that means to me versus you saying it.
Yeah, and you mentioned you've seen it way too often, and I've seen it way too often. The comment, Discovery is not real Star Trek or STD,
Yeah.
uh, or whatever. And I'm going like, who are you to say
Yeah.
that? Who are you to say that?
I didn't
Because,
realize there was a club and someone decides what's canon and what's not.
and I mean, the whole thing about canon and stuff like that, um, I kind of don't have a problem with it. I mean, I kind of have a problem with it because all of the shows that goes from original series all the way through Lower Decks and Picard and Discovery, like the way the show looks. I mean, the 60s is, despite the HD remaster they did back in '06, it still is dated. Um, and the same thing goes for at least the first two seasons of Next Generation because it's got a very '80s feel. Um,
Yeah.
but definitely, I mean, the same thing goes with DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise, and it's indicative of their time that they were made. The way the art direction of the show.
Yeah.
Like the '60s is a pretty cheap look. The original series is a pretty cheap look. You can tell. If you can't tell, but
That velour and all those,
all
all of
that
the,
low. It's a low budget TV
yeah.
show. You can't expect them to be like right now with Discovery. It's like this like cinematic um universe now. I
Yeah.
mean, with
You know, then they do
Discovery
it.
and Picard, and possibly Strange New Worlds.
That's how you
Um,
know, though, that they hit something that was important with people through the story. Because despite having a low budget, despite having the lack of resources
mhm,
to develop the show into what they imagined it in their minds to be,
mhm,
people still fawned and ogled over the
yeah,
cinematics of that show itself, from the costume design to the set design to the stories, because people cared and they liked that. And
yeah,
I feel that way about a lot of things, where it's not always about how lavishly done something is. Some of my favorite video games that I've ever played are
mhm,
Super Nintendo games. You know, there are new games that come out, new consoles, and everyone's like, wow, the graphics. And like everyone's talking tech about graphics. And I'm like, that's great. But some of my favorite games that I've ever played have been on the Super Nintendo. And they still are to this day. And they actually compete with any modern game that I've played because of their story and the quality of the game itself and the gameplay. And I think something like Star Trek, despite some people can't get over that, like some people watch the original series and they're just like, I cannot deal with the production value of this, which is fine, and to each their own. But a lot of people were able to get past that, and for the time period, it was a big deal to see their like creations and their imagination coming through with such a limited budget.
yeah, definitely. And like you and I are huge retro gamers, so like you said, I mean, we could talk about Star Trek video games down the road. We can't.
Oh
We
no, that
can.
next generation game on the Super Nintendo. Just
I've
like,
actually played both versions, actually. The one on the second.
really?
Yes, I actually have. So we could talk
Oh
about that.
man.
We could talk about
Yeah,
that down the road. A little
definitely.
bit down the
Oh
road. Who
man.
knows? Yeah, but definitely. I just have one phrase to say: visual canon be damned,
Yeah.
because it doesn't matter to me. It really
Yeah.
doesn't matter. I mean, that's why I don't mind the way. I mean, my dad watched Discovery recently on because CBS aired the first season of Discovery to make up some gaps in their production, in their programming schedule because of the pandemic. So CBS, in their infinite wisdom, decided to air season one of Star Trek Discovery on CBS, just to make up for that programming problem. So my dad has never seen Discovery before then,
Yeah.
and he told me a few things, and he told me that why does it look so advanced and stuff like that. Why does this? I know this is supposed to be before the original series, Wes, but why does it look so advanced? Well, I want to tell him it's the way.
Time is a huge factor.
Well, I have a kind of like my in my head canon an explanation of why it does look like that in universe. It's because of First Contact
Oh
when the
yeah,
Borg traveled
interesting.
back in
Yeah.
time to try to stop the first warp flight.
That's an interesting concept though, to
Yeah,
really
it's
play in like how do you make visual differences like real time and the effects of development in our real time like
yeah,
make sense in the visual canon of the shows. That's a really interesting concept.
yeah, it's in my head canon. I've been living. I've thought about that for like ever since Enterprise actually,
Yeah.
because the way things look in Enterprise especially, and especially when you get to Discovery, um, I have a feeling that it was. I mean, in real time, it's production value in the real world, but
Yeah.
in the Star Trek universe, it's probably due to the Borg traveling back in the time of Zefram Cochrane.
Yeah.
So to the time of Zefram Cochrane. So that's why I'm thinking that's probably why it looks that way in in the universe. But I know it's because of the way things were made in the real world. So
Yeah. But that's a
and
really cool, like even something like that, like the infinite bounds, like it's boundless, like the passion that people share about this show and making things work and making sense of things
yeah,
and drawing their own like ideas and conclusions from the show and just the other things that come from this, like people make like novelty accounts on Twitter that are Star Trek characters. One of the first like Twitter accounts I ever followed on Twitter was Riker googling things, and
oh yeah,
it's hilarious. Or like during Trump's presidency, someone had made a Gul Dukat account that directly mirrored everything that Trump ever tweeted in the form of like Federation space, time period, Star Trek canon, and would like say the same concepts with a different like situation in Star Trek. And I mean, and then there's a Twitter account that every day posts a countdown to first contact, like how many days until first contact, like, and it just that type of media that there could be that much of an output from a fandom, like that there's just so much more like content to be explored off of these shows, not even through a show, but
hmm
just off of a show, like people making memes, people having groups on Facebook talking about it, like wholesome posting versus shit posting versus like actually talking about episodes or people writing fan fiction. Like it's such such a vast amount of culture that exists outside of these shows for those shows.
yeah, definitely. And I did write fan fiction, so I did. Um, I know. Did you ever do that?
No, I had a lot of friends who did, but I always loved reading. I loved reading people's fan fiction because I love the books, and to me, I was like, I would love to read more Star Trek stuff. But my library didn't have a lot of the books. They had a handful of the books in middle school at my library, and I didn't know at the time that you could like request books through like Minnesota's like book library stuff, like public library system. But
hmm
before I knew about that, I was always kind of being like, well, I have the internet, to look up Bird Clock featuring 12 o'clock right now. Well, 12:03 because it's set a little late, but uh, I just always thought it was super cool that people would write this stuff, and some of it is just amazing. Like,
hmm
and some of it's funny, some of it's very romantic, some of it's very action heavy, and it's just cool that people take their interpretations and make something that works with that I as a fellow Star Trek fan could read and be like, I really like this. What a cool exploration.
Yeah, definitely. And I have a whole vast of Star Trek books. Not
Yeah,
not here, not where I live, but
yeah,
I have some of here. But
yeah.
I do have a vast library of Star Trek books.
I had a friend who had humored the idea of writing a fan fiction because I got her. She's one of my friends who was a foreign exchange student here in the United States. She loves American culture. She's from Norway, and I convinced her to watch Voyager. And so she is a really big fan of like a lot of like rom-com stuff. She really loves shows where there's like character, romances. And she was dead set on the fact that Chakotay and Janeway were going to be a thing. Like she was set in her ways. She would text me about it, being really excited, being like, I can't wait for this to grow. And I sat there being like, oh, I wish I could tell you that it's not gonna happen and your heart's gonna break. And then she was so angry when she finished the series, finally being like, you tricked me. Nothing ever happened. I'm so disappointed. And I'm like, I couldn't root it for you. I wanted to give you hope. And if that's the reason why you were continuing watching, I wanted you to keep watching. I don't know. But then we had this whole talk about like, well, fan fiction. Come on, like you can write your own story. I'm sure there already exists tons of stories about that. I'm like, go find it. I bet I can find you like, like stories where people have written it to be where Chakotay and Janeway end up together, or we'll write something like, like whatever you want, because the possibilities are endless, and the fans are what drive the show.
Yeah, exactly. Like as Spock always says, there's always possibilities. So yeah, definitely. I did write fan fiction. I know I did that. I know, and I got. I don't want to get into much into that, but it's just like I did a lot of fan fiction,
Yeah.
because I enjoyed writing. That's one of the reasons why I have a English degree actually, because I actually enjoy writing. Um, but um, but definitely there's also like a lot of other things too. People make their own. Actually, I've seen a lot of people especially when it comes to convention season, which hopefully will return in some fashion this year.
Yeah, the fandom culture during COVID has been a very challenging time to be a Star Trek fan, especially a fandom that's built so heavily around dressing up, attending conventions, and seeing a lot of these actors talk on panels, and consuming that form of content. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays in, like especially with shows coming out during COVID and trying to upkeep that, and how that will open up a new range of things for people to be able to attend conventions again, and panels and different events that are related to these series.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, people regarding cosplay, I see a lot of people when it comes to convention season make their own costumes. So I mean, granted, you can buy like a kind of like a almost exact replica of your favorite uniform.
Or you can commission people who are very good at making stuff to make things for you as well.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, so yeah, you could buy one, or you can convince your friends to do it, and just pay them make it. And some they turn out well. Sometimes they turn out a little bit not what you're expecting, but
it's the passion behind it that matters.
Exactly.
I love seeing people's uniforms. I don't care how little or how much effort or how good or bad that big effort turns out, because I love seeing people dressing for it's like, oh my gosh, you're a Bajoran because you got the nice little, you did the earring, and you got the nice nose.
And then you did the wrinkles on the nose.
Mm-hmm. It's super cool. Like,
yeah, it is pretty cool. Yeah, and it's all cool. I'm cool. I'm cool with that. But yep. But I think we should go back to a little. I mean, I'm going to backtrack a little bit and talk more about the ugly side of the fandom. Because like I said, I've done that, the gatekeeping, and that kind of thing, and I freely admit it as a fan.
I think it's important to admit when people have done that. I've caught myself doing that with things that I'm very like passionate or very well informed about, especially in things like science or just things that are really evolved around like knowing a lot of knowledge in order to do that. And that feeling of being like, oh yeah, you like computer science, tell me every language you've ever written in, how do you even write this, like, or something. But it's something that you kind of have to work with yourself on to check that and be like, am I kind of gatekeeping this right now? Like, this person's really passionate about this as well, maybe not nearly as in depth as I am, but that doesn't dismiss or mean that they should be denied liking this thing or called out for not liking it as much as me, because it's not supposed to be relative. It's just however much you like it, that's all that matters.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, I mean, yeah, it bothers me. I mean, I'll freely admit, when I see those comments, Discovery is not real Star Trek, or I hate Picard, Kurtzman ruined Picard, Um,
And it's hard because like for
it,
some people like it's easy to like dismiss it. Like I've met people who don't think I'm a big enough Star Trek fan, which whatever, but I will still like it regardless. But what's painful to watch is people who are just starting to get into something and they end up stop liking it because of that. Like I've had
mm,
friends who turned away liking Star Trek because of how they were treated, like from people who in the Star Trek community. Social media can be an amazing thing, but it can also really exacerbate and exaggerate a lot of that type of mindset. Like people get piled on so easily on social media. Like it's easier, I feel like, to talk about things like this in a person to person format or face to face, whatever, however, either digitally or in person. But when it's something like a post and someone posts something and someone's like, that's incorrect, or that's, you don't know as much about this as I do. And then people start piling on, and it can make people be like, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I don't like this anymore. And we'll disappear from it. And then you've lost a fan, like someone who might, really like this show and share that love with you. And you've now scared them off. It's
yeah,
not
yeah,
cool.
yeah, and and I agree with you. That's how. And I know I've caught myself doing it a few times, but I know I've been doing it. I know I've done it, and I feel bad if someone turns away from Star Trek, which unfortunately, if you force someone to watch Star Trek, that could be a bad
Yeah,
thing
you don't ever
too.
want to push people liking something down their throats either. Like that's not fun either.
No,
Convincing and begging people to like something. You have to like my best friend in the whole world absolutely does not like Star Trek. She does not like Star Wars. Anything that it's kind of a funny dynamic that my best friend is basically the opposite of me. Anything that especially nerd culture, anything that's considered stereotypically nerdy, she's not into. Never watched Lord of the Rings. Has not watched any of the Star Wars films through like fully and dedicatingly. Like she's seen them in passing on TV, and that's it. She has not watched any Star Trek. Very few things that she has seen have been like the movies, and she only liked it because of Chris Pine being the Captain Kirk. But it's something where it's like she can appreciate how much I like Star Trek, and she will talk with me about Star Trek and things that I think are interesting about it. And even though she can't contribute to those conversations sometimes based on technicality, she understands why I like the show, like why it's important to so many people, and like that in itself is supporting it without having to be a fan. Even that she understands the impact it has on people, on our culture, on technology, even like some of the thing like sliding doors, like what a weird concept. And now look how we have automatic doors everywhere. We have handheld technology that we personally carry around everywhere, just like in Star Trek. Like it's interesting to see how it affects our culture, even if you don't have to be a fan. Like you understand that.
yeah, totally. Yeah, forcing people to like things that you like is not good either. Because my wife, she has seen the three J.J. Abrams movies, and it was pretty much for this like, kind of like, I mean, she enjoyed seeing them with me, but that was it. She didn't watch them by herself or anything like that.
Yeah.
And she tried to watch the original series films too, but then she kind of stopped after watching The Wrath of Khan because Spock died. And she goes like, "Why did you kill off Spock? I like Spock. Why did you
Oh
do that?"
man.
It's like, I want to tell you so bad that the next movie he comes back.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's pretty much the same kind of thing with your friend is, she's kind of a nerd like me, but when it comes to like fantasy things like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
granted, I've only seen one
Everyone's
of the.
a nerd about something.
Yeah,
My
exactly.
shameless thing that I love to be nerdy about with my best friend is Twilight. I love Twilight. I also love Pride and Prejudice and a ton of like Charlotte Bronte and Jane Austen things. I'll nerd out about those any
Hmm.
day.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing to be ashamed of.
No, exactly. So, you know, it just doesn't really matter what you're into. It's just like, it's just if you enjoy it, that's all that matters. So,
Exactly.
It really does. I really have nothing much to add regarding that. I really don't.
I think we
So
covered everything super well. That's what I kind of wanted to chat about, the different aspects of that, what it means to us, how the fandom has grown through its pain points and its power points. Like, I I mean, it's an interesting history to analyze, and it's still happening to this day. It's alive and it's changing, the dynamic of gatekeeping versus inviting new people to like Star Trek, and different, demographics of people enjoying the show is always changing. So I'm here for it,
yeah,
and I will
definitely.
work with it no matter what, because I love Star Trek.
Yeah, and I'm like, I
And I
know that
love the
one.
community, more importantly.
Yeah, definitely. I like being part of the community of Star Trek fans. I really do. And I'm gonna say I would say like that some of the people that I know now on social media, um, like I know one of them has said that they want to be a guest sometime. Um,
Oh,
that's
same.
how I got into this kind of thing in the first place, was because I wanted to share this my passion of Star Trek with people. I
Yeah.
mean, through my voice. And I mean, now we got you now through our
Mm-hmm.
voices. Now we got you, but now I got you, but through our voices, and hopefully, you know, yeah. And I like discussing Star Trek with people, and I was like, and that's how I got to know some of those people I know now. Like my
Yeah.
friend Amy out in Vegas. She's a high school math teacher. Um, and she kept being I mean, she's still my friend and stuff like that. And then she's a big Star Trek fan just like myself, and what's funny? Her favorite character is Deanna Troi.
Heck
So
yeah.
yeah, her favorite character is Deanna Troi. So, but speaking of Vegas, I know that they're planning a convention this summer, but who knows what's going to happen
See
with
how it goes.
see how it goes with the pandemic. They canceled last year, unfortunately,
Yeah,
because they
makes
here's the funny
sense.
thing about STLV. They had planned it for August, then delayed to December, and then canceled altogether.
Oh yeah, we
And
gotta
it's
roll the punches.
Yeah,
That's how it
definitely.
goes.
And I'm hoping to eventually get there.
Yeah,
That's I know I have a goal of actually going down there and be down there and
it'd be
meet my
fun to
friend.
finally attend a convention. I've
Yeah,
never been, so
yeah, and conventions are fun. I mean, granted, I haven't gone since I was like 7 years old. I mean, that's how I met Jonathan Frakes, actually.
heck yeah.
Yeah, I actually met Jonathan Frakes once when they had Star Trek conventions here in Minneapolis, at the convention center, and I actually had a run-in with Mr. Frakes. So, and I was like 7 years old. I was nervous, obviously, because
Oh yeah,
I was a
definitely.
nervous kid, and stuff like that. So that's how I got to meet Jonathan Frakes, was actually at the Star Trek convention here in Minneapolis. Um, and I haven't met anybody since then, obviously, because I haven't
Yeah,
gone to a convention since.
yeah,
And I that's what I'm hoping to eventually is actually do that. I mean, go to SDLV or to Comic Con or to the other like other or any or yeah San Diego Comic Con or any of those other ones that have Star Trek people there, so I can have like a the one actor I want to meet right now is Mary Wiseman, who plays Sylvia Tilly on Star Trek Discovery. Because I love the character. I
yeah,
love her.
yeah.
Because I don't know, I have a weakness for redheads. But I mean, I love Sylvia Tilly.
Yeah,
I think throughout the 3 years of Discovery, she's grown as be one of my favorite characters. Um, and then I'm hoping, and that's what my hope is hopefully eventually, go into like go in to see a panel or join a panel about Star Trek.
Yeah, I'd
And
love to talk with any of the writers or people who are in the writing room. That's regardless of characters. I'm personally not much of like a star-studded person. Like I'll if I meet a famous person, I cannot even like react differently. I treat them just like I would. I've been known to almost seem like I have a lack of formality to me, to the point where people are like, "Is that a social? Is that a social ineptness, or is like a social like something that helps you or hurts you?" But it's always worked in my favor of not understanding formality, because I'll just be like, "Oh, hey, cool person," and it's like, "That's a famous person," and I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, they're still a person." So I don't know. I'm like, I'm gonna treat them like I would like passing somebody in the street and be like, "Howdy, how you doing,
yeah,
man?"
yeah, that's how, I mean, unfortunately, I have been feeling, I mean, whenever I meet somebody that's I know from like TV, or like, especially from like, I'm gonna say from like any of the like the news stations here in the Twin Cities, um, I get starstruck.
Oh yeah.
And I get seriously nervous. Like, I know a few years ago, I remember seeing Jeff Passolt from Fox 9 at the Target in Eden Prairie, for example. Or I remember when I was a kid, I used to do the Minneapolis AIDS Walk, and Ken Barlow and Paul Majors from Care 11 were the MC, and Diana Pierce from Care 11 were the MCs of the event. And yeah, and I remember, I think I met Paul Majors once. I think I did. I don't remember because I was a kid. I don't have a really good childhood memory.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, definitely, I get starstruck, and I feel
Yeah.
feeling. I have a
It's
feeling.
such an interesting concept to be starstruck. Like, I don't know.
You're,
I like I it's more because I don't realize it in the moment. Like I remember sitting around talking for like an hour or so with Tim Blotz from Fox 9, without even really thinking about the fact that that's who he was. And someone was like, "Oh my gosh, that's so exciting!" Like, like I can't believe you're talking with him. And my parents were freaking out because I had like someone took a picture of me standing with him talking, and they're like, "That's so cool." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know. He was just somebody. He came and asked me something, and I was like, oh yeah," and just talking with him for a little bit and like eating food and stuff. And someone totally freaked out, being like, "No way." Or I unintentionally, before even realizing who she was, met Sheryl Sandberg in person at a Grace Hopper event when I was in college. And I didn't even have her book or anything. I didn't even know about Lean In. It was my first exposure to seeing the computer science world, where women, like, dedicated to women. And I just went because there weren't enough women in our school who wanted to go. So I just went with. And I talked with her, and like it went up and was like, "That was a really great panel. Like, thanks for talking and stuff," and just getting to chat with her. And then one of my friends in college was reading her book, and I was like, "Hey, I've met that lady. Who is that?" And they're like, "It's the CEO of Facebook, like one of the like CEOs." And I'm like, "Oh, that's who she is." I didn't even realize it, but it was cool to meet her.
yeah, definitely, yeah, yeah. Like I
I don't know if
said,
it's always one of those weird things with like fandom culture, like talking with an actor who played a character versus them actually liking their character, because that
mhm.
can vary. Like I think about William Shatner being like, "Oh God, please," like
Oh yeah,
I don't want to talk about being Kirk, which that's always one of those weird things where I'm like, I don't know if I would talk with the character. I wouldn't know if I talk with an actor about their character more so than I'd rather talk with a writer for that character, because
yeah,
there are some people who are really passionate about playing their character, and so they like their own character, they love it. They'll be an ambassador to that character as a real life person and be like, "Yes, I love this character. Here's why. Here's how they're written. Here's why I like playing them." And then you people like Shatter who are like, "I really don't care. Like, please stop referring to me as Kirk. Like, I'm William Shatner. I'm not. I'm not. Those are not mutually exclusive things."
yeah. Oh, that brings me back to that sketch on Saturday Night Live that on that one episode of Saturday Night Live he hosted to promote Star Trek 4. That's what he was on. That's what he
Yeah.
was on. That's what he was on. He actually was on twice. But that first one, the whole infamous sketch that like that get a life. It's just a TV show.
Yeah.
From what I understand about that kind of thing, after that episode had aired and stuff like that, he goes back to LA and he runs into Harv Bennett and Leonard Nimoy, and they're going like, what the heck were you thinking, Bill?
Yeah.
What the heck were you thinking? You're gonna hurt us here.
Yeah. For some people, they
But
really like their characters and identify with them, and
yeah,
that's not
but
always the case.
yeah, that's not always the case. There are some people who absolutely hate it. Like Leonard Nimoy at one point hated playing Spock. I mean, it was. I mean, he written a book called "I Am Not Spock."
Yeah.
At one point, but
It can suck when a fandom overtakes your entire identity. If, like, when I think of the actors, like, think of uh um the actor for Harry Potter and
yeah,
how
Daniel Radcliffe, yeah,
yeah, and how long it took for him to separate himself from that identity, being
yeah,
like, everyone would just refer to him as Harry Potter, and it's like, well, I'm Daniel Radcliffe, and like
yeah,
that's not all I am, but because that was his first big role, and it was such a big, I mean, the entirety of that whole series is around his character being on screen, so it's hard to separate yourself from that identity, just like these characters, where an entire show is made up of them being those characters, and that's their entirety of being on screen. Like, it's tough.
yeah, definitely, yeah, and yeah, definitely the typecasting, yeah. I mean, granted, some of the actors from the other shows have done other things, like, but they're always going to be identified with their big thing that they were a part of, like Star Trek,
Yeah.
because they always, I mean, casting directors always say when, or their agents,
Yeah.
they're trying to cast a new Star Trek show. The agent says, "Okay, here's an audition for you. It could potentially change your life." And for most people, for most of the casts, it has, um, because suddenly they're part of this fandom that they're trying to be embraced by,
Yeah.
and you know, and eventually they eventually are, like the Next Generation cast was reviled at first for going like,
Yeah.
"How dare you replace Kirk and Spock?"
Yeah.
and 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 eventually they became, part of the pop culture and stuff like that. They began being very embraced by it, and they have done other things since, like the typecasting. Like, for example, Patrick Stewart, in addition to playing Picard, he's been Professor Xavier in the X-Men films,
Yeah.
and was it Bullock, Deputy Director Bullock in American Dad,
Mhm.
um, and Brent Spiner, Dr. Oaken in the Independence Day films.
Mhm.
Yep. Yeah, for that. So, yeah, definitely with the typecasting is definitely an issue for definitely for the actors, but then, you know, they get to, enjoy being embraced by the fandom.
Yeah. If
So
they want it, yeah.
if they want it, I know
Yeah.
most of the modern day cast do. They
Yes.
enjoy the fandom. They enjoy being like, you know, there are people, they enjoy the fact that there are people who love them and love their acting, love their characters. And then there's like the original series cast that go like, I kind of don't want to talk about it. I kind of do.
Yeah.
It kind of especially with George Takei and William Shatner having that big feud that's been around since the show was first made.
Yeah.
So definitely, yeah. So I know that eventually the cast of Picard, Lower Decks, Strange New Worlds, Prodigy, and then any other shows that come after that, who knows, um,
Yeah.
will be embraced by the fandom eventually. I mean, granted, I think the noisy minority, that's what I call the people who think Discovery is not just Star Trek, etc. I hate
Yeah.
Picard, etc. Um, it's because it's a noisy minority, and most of us fans enjoy it just for the art, and it doesn't matter what the show looks like as long as the stories and the characters and the stories that they tell and the characters they inhabit, that's more important than
Yeah.
what it looks like.
Yep.
So that's
Exactly.
that's and in conclusion, I say that stuff. So anyway, I guess that's it. Um, Make sure that you give us feedback if you want to about this episode, and maybe you should give us your feedback of how you've experienced your fandom. Like, have you been embraced? Have you been hated, reviled, etc.? Um, I'm perfectly willing to entertain any feedback you may have about this.
Yeah,
So
love to hear
definitely.
it. Something that's important. It's close to my heart. I've
Yeah,
felt the pain points of that myself, and
I have
it's
too.
good to hear people's stories.
Yeah, definitely. We like to hear your stories too. So definitely give us a shout out on Facebook, YouTube, or email us. Like I said, TC Trekkies podcast at gmail.com is the email
Yeah,
address.
and you can also reach out to either of us on our
Yeah.
personal accounts. Like I'm on Instagram and Facebook and
Mm-hmm.
Messenger. You can get a hold of me on any of those as well.
Yep, same with me because I would love to hear what your thoughts about your experience with fandom because obviously this is a bigger topic than it's just the two of us talking.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear you guys talk about it. So until next time, live long and
Live long and
prosper.
prosper.